Balthasar Krieshire was born in Germany in 1813. Mr. Krieshire moved to New York, where he was one of the most prominent families in the area. Staten Island, New York was surrounded in clay, which was the perfect place to build two factories that made brick. This family became very wealthy in the area, or off the area, mind you, so much so that the surrounding town was called Krieshireville. This wealthy Staten Island family started to grow. In fact, Krieshire had 7 children. Mr. Krieshire married twice, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Mr. Krieshire gives $75,000 to Henry Steinway, which helped them prevail. In fact, one of the Steinways married his daughter, Louise. So the Steinways went on and found Steinway and Sons, which was a great piano manufacturer. Balthasar also built 2 identical mansions on the hill that overlooked the brick factories for 2 of his sons. One was for his oldest son, Charles, and the other was for his youngest brother, Edward. And this is where the story can become quite controversial. The mansions were finished in 1885. The Victorian, asymmetrically massed 2.5-story wood frame house was built in American Queen Anne style. These beautiful twin homes sat on the hill overlooking the brick factory. And for the interior and decorations on the inside of the home, they spared no expense. They had decorative railings, posts, and brackets. They had really tall, beautiful chimneys. And the most extravagant and most beautiful part of the house was the corner tower. But to many, the most intricate detail in the home is the leather wallpaper, which is just absolutely beautiful. Shortly after Mr. Krieshire built these homes for his children, he passed away at the age of 73. After his death, the family took over the brick factories and they received and took over a few properties. But it did not end in a happily ever after. One of the brick factories caught on fire, and they say 65 to 70% of it was destroyed in that fire. This was very devastating to the family. The family actually tried to rebuild it, but the blow was too great and their fortunes soon failed, leading to one of his sons to commit a violent suicide in the mansion that stands today. Now they were in the Great Depression. All the great things that were happening were now turning dark. And during that dark period, one of the 2 mansions were destroyed. It was destroyed by a fire. One of the brothers died during that fire along with his wife, while the other house still stood and that brother survived. But the fall of the great fortunes and the great business in the area would take its toll on the last remaining brother, according to folklore, because there's a few different versions of how he took his life. One version says that he had shot himself in the temple, whereas another says he had shot himself just outside of one of the factories over an argument. Some people say there's a possibility that he was even murdered. But one fact remains that on July 8th, 1894, he did die. Edward had died from suicide. After this tragedy, these homes have gone through a handful of owners, and they have told a few stories. It is said that people hear a woman wailing through the walls and pots and pans beating. But this isn't where the tragedy ends. In fact, the next chapter in this story only gets more horrific, more tragic. And if you know New York's history, everybody knows that it's no big secret that they are filled with crime, mob, mafia, New York is known to house the most prolific mafia families ever in the history of the United States. In 1998, the Krieshire mansion was bought with the intention to restore it and eventually resell it by Isaac Yamadovan. And in 2008, a caretaker who went by the name Joe Black, aka Joe Young, was now working for one of those mafia families, disguised as a caretaker for the Krieshire home. Joseph works for the Bonanno family. If you've ever heard of them, they are definitely one of the top mob families in New York. Many people believe that the mob family bought the Krieshire mansion to use it as a distraction and to keep things under the radar. According to rumors, the house played a significant role in the mafia's deception. Its history is not definite. What we do know, however, is that this mob family does set in stone the story and the name of the Krieshire mansion forever. Joseph Young was an ex-Marine, and now he was working for one of the biggest mafia families in New York. According to court papers, he was paid $8,000 to make a hit on a man that went by the name of Robert. While Joseph Black did work as a bouncer for a bar not too far from the mansion, his girlfriend worked at a massage parlor not too far from him. He also continued to play the role as the caretaker of the Krieshire mansion. We also know now that Robert has a hit out on him. Robert is in the mafia as well, but in a rival family. And according to the stories I've read, Robert somehow offended a crew leader. His name was Gino Gelstra. Young was hired by one of the most prominent mafia families to be a hitman and to take Robert out. But Robert isn't prepared for what comes next. Joe Black and two other guys seek out Robert, get a hold of him, and bring him back to the Krieshire mansion. Once Robert is inside, they attempt to strangle Robert. But Robert doesn't want to die. He fights with everything he has and somehow manages to break free and run outside. But he doesn't get far before Joe Black tackles him to the ground and starts stabbing him repeatedly with a knife. Again, their attempt to kill Robert was ineffective. Nearby was a square hole in the ground that looked the shape of a grave. It was filled with water, and they dragged Robert over to the opening and drowned him. The third attempt on Robert's life was successful. They left Robert's body lying there while they went to Dunkin' Donuts and had coffee and pastries. Then they returned to the Krieshire mansion to finish up the job. At this point, they grab Robert's body and drag him back into the house. Now, some stories contradict how it was done, but we're going to go with this one for now. According to some and the majority of stories, they dragged his body into the kitchen where they cut him up into small pieces. They took the small pieces down into the cellar and threw them into a coal furnace. The FBI really didn't get around to fully investigating this murder until April 2006, and this is like a year later. After this, they had already killed Robert and gotten rid of him. In fact, they most likely wouldn't even known about it if it wasn't for somebody that actually was a whistleblower. Police finally had some sort of witness that could take this family down at least a little bit. But a few things happened that made it a little bit more difficult for investigators. At the time they were getting this information, the house had actually changed hands, and the original furnace that was in the cellar had actually been packed up and carted away. They even removed the stairway that led down into the cellar or basement. So in 2008, Young, who had already previously been convicted of arson and some other things, he was a bouncer at Staten Island strip club called Fresca's. Remembered I mentioned that earlier. He was arrested and tried for murder, also convicted and given life sentence. As for the whistleblower, he was put in a witness protection program. But right now we're hearing that actually Young is up for parole anytime. Since the house was owned by the Bonanno family, it has since been sold. It's been a restaurant, and then it was bought by another man, and then now it's being run as a music studio. Ryan rents the rooms out to other musicians to help inspire them. He says that he has heard a few things that are kind of odd inside the house. He's also allowed for paranormal investigators to come in and research and investigate the mansion. Brian says that he gets an uneasy feeling sometimes inside this home. The investigators that have gone in there and they've done research, they also said that they've heard and seen spirits and ghosts within that house. And it's no secret that the town talks about how haunted this home is. But the ghost that seemed to haunt this place doesn't seem to be Robert. It seems to be the Krieshire's family. See, there's a little bit more history that I left out. The current owner of the house says there's been times that he has heard doors slam behind him. Sometimes he can hear a woman weeping on the second floor, but there's nobody there. Edward's wife's weeping can be heard through the walls. It is said that it is the sound of a distraught and lonely, sad wife searching for her husband. There is no doubt that there is residual energy throughout the entire home. Remnants of the yesterdays gone by. For each person, it might be different, but the fact of the matter is, it is happening. And this is why Halloween is very popular at the Krieshire Mansion. Occasionally, they have festivals and they have hay rides on this property. One year, on one Halloween, something went terribly wrong. In fact, it scared the mess out of one witness. The witness says, "I was on the back end of the hayride. Part of the act was for me to get pulled off the back of the hayride, and every time he pulled me off, I seen a young boy running around. We thought it was the son of one of the actresses, but she didn't bring her kid that day. This child, this boy apparition that they see, they believe might be Balthasar's son. He did have 7 children. And this young child has been seen multiple times on the Krieshire property. Could this be Henry, the son of Balthasar Krieshire, who died at 6 years old?" Remember what I mentioned earlier, that Balthasar had been married twice. And remember, they have heard female apparitions. Well, his second wife, Matilda, had a horrible ending. She actually died giving birth to Edward. So you see, the tragedy is never ending. And according to legends, Balthasar had 2 other children that passed away. So according to a lot of published reports, all those children, entities, spirits, and ghosts that they see might be the Krieshire children. That would explain the so many crazy things happening inside that home. The banging pots, the woman wailing, slamming doors of anger. And according to locals, they've actually been able to identify a few ghosts. They identified Edward and Frida, his wife. But locals can't seem to get enough of the history of the Krieshire house. In fact, You know, even if they didn't see a ghost, this house is haunted by memories, by murders, and by a family's tragic events. It is considered to be one of the most haunted places in all of New York. It might be a new story, but its popularity continues to grow, and especially around Halloween. And if ever you want to experience some history that will make you have goosebumps, perhaps maybe make a trip to Staten Island, New York, and visit the Krieshire Mansion. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have an amazing Halloween. See you soon.